What's up, YouTubers? It's me, Johnny. I want to make a video on how not to buy real estate in Latin America. Unfortunately, I'm on Facebook a lot, but not as much as I used to be. I'm on a lot of I don't know what you call it, the Facebook groups that talk about living offshore or expating or living in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, South America, etc., etc. One of the things that always comes up is how to buy real estate, how much is it, and or it's like how much to rent and like how to go about it and all stuff like that. One thing that really concerns personally when I get worried when I see people, the first thing they want to do is when they come down to Latin America, they want to get a residency before they even know if they even like a country. They want to buy real estate before they even know if they like a city. And what usually ends up happening is they get scammed. And oftentimes it can be by a foreigner or it can be by a local. Like there's a saying in Costa Rica, there's more land titles than there is land, which apparently is true. I'm not surprised by that. But in spite of that, they still want to own real estate in Costa Rica or wherever they're going. I think that's a function, at least of North Americans, people from the United States or Canada, that in general, most middle class people own real estate or they own a house or two in their lifetime. So they want to continue that when they go move to Latin America. They want to be part of their community and own real estate. But what's unfortunate about that is in my opinion, they go about it the wrong way. Usually what they do is they come down here, they've heard about all the scams and schemes and things like that. So one of the first things they do is they go to an American type brokerage where they sell you property for 2 to 4 times what it actually costs. I've talked about that before. That's really easy for them to do. They'll either buy up the real estate before you do and then sell it to you double or triple or whatever, or they buy an option on it. They find out what you want to buy. They go to the property owner. They say, I'll buy it for like $100K, and then they sell it to the guy from Canada or the United States for $200,000 or $300,000. That's pretty standard. Another thing they do is they don't do that, but they go to locals and they buy real estate from locals who are very, very famous for scamming Americans or Europeans or Canadians. So what I'm getting at is, if you want to avoid all that, what I'm about to say is pretty tough, and a lot of Americans don't want to hear this. But before you buy anywhere, you need to really live in a place for at least a couple of years. And while you're living in a place for a couple of years, travel around to see what part of the country you like. I can't tell you how many people I've come across, especially in Mexico and in Panama. My parents were in Panama, and they had many stories like I'm about to repeat. But people would buy real estate in Panama on the coast. They would, specifically the Pacific coast, they would pay way too much for it. Then they found out they couldn't sell it for anything close to they paid for it. But what was worse was the maintenance cost. They were not aware of the salt air and the climate on the coast can be hot and humid. It's pretty, I hate to say hellish, but it's pretty hard on your house. You have to do a lot to maintain it when you live on the coast as compared to the Altiplano, where it's more cooler and drier, and the maintenance costs of maintaining a home are much, much less. Another thing people do is they buy a pool without understanding the maintenance costs of maintaining the pool, especially if you live in an earthquake zone where there's lots of little minor earthquakes. They could put those little teeny tiny cracks in your pool. If the crack is big enough, then you'll know that your pool empties out of water overnight. And it does cost money to maintain a pool, but if you can afford it, you can probably afford the day-to-day maintenance. But people make these investments, excuse me, not knowing anything about the culture here, anything how you go about buying things. And one of the biggest things I talk about in my videos, or I try to get across, but many times I don't get this across well enough, is you need to build up trust with people over time. Latins want to get to know you. You want to get to know them before you do any kind of business. If you live in an area for a couple of years, here, let me talk about one of my friends, Tom. This came up in a recent Facebook post about how much are lots in up on the lake, Lake Atitlan, for those who want to know, for reference, Lake Atitlan. And the Swede, the guy that used to be in this apartment building here where I live, he was telling me that lots are like 10 grand now. I have no idea what they are. I'm just taking his word for it. They may be more, they may be less. Now, my friend Tom bought a lot up there for $2,500 or pounds sterling. I forget which one it was. Now with the pounds so weak, it doesn't matter. Anyways, the reason Tom could get a really good piece of land like that really cheap was, this is again my opinion, feel free to disagree with me, but first when he came down to Latin America, he went to South America. He got to know Spanish really well. He speaks Spanish really well. He got to know the culture. And anyways, he came up to Guatemala, and then he worked for some Americans doing some stuff. And he spent years in Guatemala up on the lake being of service to people in business there, both Americans and Latin and Guatemalans. He really got to know the prices. But what's really more important than that, even more important than knowing Spanish and all that, was he spent years getting to know what things really cost for rents. He spent $50 on what I'll call a rustic house. Anyways, a lot of people will spend $200, $300, $400 for the same thing. It always blows my mind. It always blows my mind. Anyways, he got to know people really, really well. He got to know who are the scammers as far as real estate transactions go for Americans, Europeans, and for Guatemalans who scam Americans. He got to know who the trustworthy people were. And you can only know that over time by getting to know people and getting out there and meeting people. I need to stress that. You need to get out there and meet people, get to know who people are. You need to have a lawyer. You don't really need to, but I think you need to have a lawyer. A lot of people poo-poo me in that, but like if you spent years down here and you use a lawyer to get your residency, a lawyer to help you with your business, that means you spent a lot of time with him and his staff. You've built up a lot of trust with them. They know you, you know them. You can throw out a real estate transaction to him and he can get a feel for it. Your lawyer can have a pretty good idea in these small communities who's legitimate, who's not. And he can just look at the documents, research the documents and the paperwork, and see if that person has a reputation for stealing people. He can search the court records and all that. Stuff like that's really important down here when you don't have a lot of recourse if you actually lose your money, in my opinion. But most people say, no, Johnny, you don't need a lawyer. You're wasting your time. I get a residency. I could save so much. That's true. You can get a residency and save yourself so much money, except for when you don't, except for when you spend all that time and effort. Then you find out the law changed. You find out your fixer was lying to you. You find out the paperwork he introduced in court, they cut corners, and now you have to start all over. That's what typically has happened in Guatemala. Anyways, getting back to my friend Tom, he spent years researching real estate opportunities and business opportunities, and he'd worked with both Latins and Americans in business down here. And he finally, here's what typically happens. He got a good place for $2,500 or pounds, I can't remember. But here's the thing. The people who sold it to him, he knew pretty well. In fact, he built up a relationship over a couple of years. Here's what typically happens. They had a family crisis emergency. They needed $2,500. So that's what they sold this lot for, even though it quite possibly could be sold for a lot more. They needed the money. And he had built up trust with them. They liked him. He liked them. He wasn't going to mess around and negotiate like 50 cents on the dollar, none of that. He knew it was a good deal. He jumped on it. He got it. Now, there's another famous, well, not maybe anymore, but libertarian dude who started up businesses in Ecuador back before Ecuador was on most people's radars. He may still own restaurants down there. I'm not really sure because I haven't kept up with him. He bought like what I would call a 6-figure property for 20 grand. And it was basically the same thing. He had a lawyer down there help he and his wife get residency. He had a at least one restaurant at the time, and he treated people well. People treated him really well in the community. And because he's well thought of and because he's of service to the people there locally, and because he spent so much time there, he and his wife got to know a lot of people. And instead of him like putting out offers on real estate, the reverse would happen, because people knew he's well funded, they knew he's honest, they knew he wasn't going to try to negotiate 10 cents on the dollar, that kind of thing. And he spent a lot of time there, and he kind of knew what was going on. Well, he bought a what I would say a 6-figure property for like 20 grand cash. What happened was, or at least what he related, the family had an emergency, a medical emergency. They needed 20,000 cash fast. He had the cash. He knew the owners knew him. Here's what's important. They knew each other for a long time. He didn't pull any nonsense like, I want to only give you 10 grand. No, he said, yeah, I'll give you 20 grand for this really marvelous property. He got the property for 20 grand. And that's how a lot of real estate transactions are done down here. You have to get to know people. When they like you and trust you, they will sell you property, oftentimes very undervalued for what they could get. It's actually the same for rent. It can be the same for rent. There was a lady on Facebook, I can't remember if it was here in Shayla or in Antigua, but she had paid 2 or 3 months deposit. She thought that was a cultural norm. And what I would say, whatever the cultural norm is, doesn't really matter. First, last, and deposit, or one month deposit, or whatever. It's whatever you negotiate. Well, she wanted to put in, what do you call it? An air conditioner, like a $6,000 or $7,000 compressor, like a train or something like that, for $6,000 or $7,000. She had it in her lease. If she cut off the lease, she would lose her deposits. It was also in her lease, if she put in the air conditioner, she wouldn't own it. She couldn't take it with her. And she's still going to pay, at least from the post, it sounds like she will still put in a $6,000 compressor air conditioner, like I think in Antigua or something, like where it's not even that hot. It blows me away what Americans will do and how much money they will waste and how inflexible they are. Anyways, if you can afford to do it, but I don't get why you would have an air conditioner, especially in a place like Antigua. Anyways, she found out from a lot of the commenters that it's whatever you negotiate. Like in general, I've paid 1 month, but in a lot of my apartments here, I don't even pay any deposit anymore. And I'm not happy or unhappy if they don't accept that. Like, for example, a lot of places will say we want like this much of a rent deposit and 1 month's rent, and then another deposit for damage. And I'm cool with that. I just always say, no, thank you. And I'm glad, because we don't waste each other's time. We get right down to business. And that's just not for me, because I've had too much experience where you never get your deposit back. You can leave a apartment spick and span clean, nothing wrong with it. You don't get nothing. You don't get nothing. Your damages deposit, nothing. You don't get nothing back. And typically they'll say, well, we want to give you your deposit back, but we just don't have the money. That's really true. I don't think they're lying or BSing you. That's why I don't really pay a deposit. Or sometimes if I do, I'll say, instead of you giving the deposit back, can I, for the last month, just not pay it? And usually they go for that. But in general, I don't even pay deposits anymore, unless I really, really want something or really, really like it, or there's some unusual reason that I want that place. But because of all the choices in Latin America, I've never found that to be the case for me. Everything I say is just as true in the Philippines when I lived there. I used to pay a lot of deposits. I lost them all. But for me at the time, I didn't care, because the deposits weren't that much in dollar terms. And I didn't care if I walked away, but I learned from that. You can just negotiate so you don't have to pay the deposit. So that's what I do. If they're not cool, that's cool. I'm cool with that. I'm not mad or angry. I just want to, go on to the next deal or transaction where I can get what I want. They can get what they want. And that's how it goes. That's how I usually negotiate rents. Another thing, I don't like in the past, maybe you could do 50 cents on the dollar, but like a lot of times you can ask for 5 or 10% off the rent and get it. There's just all kinds of things you can negotiate. But if you were like, I don't know, if you don't get to know the culture down here and you're too much of an American or European, you're driving too hard to bargain, you might not get what you want. It just depends. The most important thing I can say as far as getting cheap rent or buying property cheap is getting to know people over a 2 or 3 year period, knowing exactly what you want and knowing the market. See a lot of places, look at a lot of places, get a feel for what prices really are. A lot of foreigners are really shocked at how high real estate is in Latin America, but because of the crackdown on the cartels, more and more people put their money in real estate and not in the bank. So that's partly why real estate prices are so high. Then there's inflating of the money supply. And then there's all the foreign capital. I've talked about this on Facebook groups. Like, I know towns in Mexico where half the town's owned by Europeans and Americans. There's just that much capital flooding in to these small towns. So rents can go like from like $150, $250 to like $500 for the same place. Some of those places that are $150, $250, you can buy them for like $15,000 or $25,000. You can fix them up and flip them for 50 or 60 or 70 grand. And you can do that up to a certain point. And then you bought up everything you can flip. And that's cool. If you're not sure, that's a cool thing you can do. But as prices go up in these small communities, it creates a lot of resentment against foreigners coming in and buying up the real estate. It's the same thing when the cartels buy up a lot of real estate in small towns and kind of push people out who can't afford to live there. So anyways, that's partly why prices can be much higher than you think in Latin America for real estate, for rents and things like that. But in general, if you're coming from a high cost of living in North America, they are much, much cheaper, at least for rents. In fact, when you see what rents are and then compare it to what you got to pay, you realize there's a huge delta or a huge gap in that. So, and there's a reason for that. Anyways, that's it for tonight. Like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks.